Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the Waco ISD Board of Trustees to order. A quorum is present. I also would like to welcome everyone who is watching this meeting on Waco ISD TV, cable channel 17, and online at wacoisd.org/live. On March 16th, Texas Governor Greg Abbott granted a request from the state's Attorney General to temporarily suspend certain open meetings laws in order to allow telephonic or video conference meetings in response to COVID-19. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certify the following. 1, members of the public may watch this meeting live on WISD TV and online. 2, notice of this meeting was posted online for at least 72 hours. 3, to comment on an agenda item, members of the public were instructed in the notice for the meeting to submit their comments in writing to Joshua Wucher by 10 o'clock last night. Although members of the board are not gathered in a central physical location, we do have a quorum in attendance at this meeting by video conference. 5, we are meeting using the Zoom video conferencing application, which allows for two-way communication. 6, there are no limits on the number of people who can stream the meeting live online or watch it live on cable channel 17. 7, all other meeting procedures will adhere to board adopted procedures to the extent practicable. 8, all items to be discussed or voted upon have been posted in accordance with state law. 9, a video conference of this meeting is being made and will be posted to the district's website at a later date. And if you have any questions about these suspended laws, please contact the Office of the Attorney General by calling 888-672-6787 or by emailing toma@oag.texas.gov. Welcome, everybody. Good to see you. Next is public comments, and I understand from Mr. Wucher that we did not receive any. Is that correct?
That is correct, Madam President. We did not receive any public comments.
Okay, thank you. So next is Superintendent's report. Dr. Kincannon. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you and good evening to everyone. I have 2 items listed there, but I'll take those together. School begins on September the 8th for Waco ISD. That's 3 weeks away. And so this evening, I would like to provide you with an update on our preparations for the new school year. Currently, we have 10,320 students who have registered for the upcoming school year. That's really good progress. Of those, 7,999 have made a choice of either in-person or remote instruction. And at this time, approximately 56% of our students are planning to participate in remote instruction. So I understand we're ahead of where we normally are on getting registrations in the system, and I'm really pleased with the progress that we've made. But we still need people to register as quickly as possible because that impacts our staffing. When we surveyed our families, more than 70% reported that we did an excellent or a good job of making learning materials and instruction available in the spring. That said, we know that for too many of our families, at-home learning was a challenge in the spring. So as we have planned for this fall, one major goal has been to improve the quality of our remote instruction. And we're doing that in a number of ways that I want to share with the board. We've discussed some of these, others we haven't, but I want to make sure that we're clear on how we're providing, improving the quality of our instruction. We've purchased licensing to implement a new learning management system. That's an online platform for students to log into to receive content and submit assignments. For our elementary students, we'll be using Seesaw, and for our secondary students, we'll be using Canvas. We provided our teachers with 4 days of online professional development in the use of Google and either Seesaw or Canvas, depending on their grade levels. And at this time, we've had over 1,200 teachers and other instructional professionals enroll in Google courses with about a 65% completion rate so far. That represents over 840 individuals who have completed training in Google Level 1 and Google Level 2. In addition, 655 have enrolled in Seesaw. That's the elementary learning management system, and we have a 74% completion rate on that training. And we have 658 who are enrolled in Canvas with a 65% completion rate. We've had a lot of positive feedback from our teachers about that training. They certainly appreciate the board's approval of the $500 stipend to complete the training, and they're still working through those courses. And so we expect our completion rate to increase over the next week. And we've asked our teachers to get that taken care of before they come back to work. We've also purchased a new laptop for each one of our teachers. And again, we want to thank you for supporting that, the approval of those updated devices for instruction. So thank you, board, for that. Our technology department has purchased new high quality webcams, and I think this is one of them. And you can see the width of the camera as compared to what you might have seen me using in the past with just the simple camera on my laptop. So we have plenty of those to enhance the view of the classroom or the teaching space for our students, and teachers will have access to those. We've also purchased each teacher a professional Zoom account through ESC 12, and that will provide a greater level of security for our teachers and students and the ability for deep analytics for engagement and attendance accounting. The Zoom has some more features than Google Meet, and so we did have a request for that, and we've been able to make that happen as of today, as a matter of fact. The technology department has also developed a plan to support campuses with the deployment of devices to students. In fact, we'll be deploying some devices to students in dual credit courses next week, as their courses at MCC and TST will begin before our school year actually starts. And thanks to some good planning on the part of our technology department and the board support, more than 8,000 new student devices were ordered to support remote learning. Those devices have begun to arrive already, and while we won't have all of those in time for the start of the school year, with those and the devices we already had on hand, we don't anticipate any problems with providing students who need a device with one for learning. We've ordered additional hotspots to check out to our students. Thanks to TEA's cost share grant, we were able to get an additional 2,200 mobile hotspots at a reduced cost. And with the devices we purchased in the spring, that brings our total to about 2,700. And finally, we've partnered with the Housing Authority to provide internet connectivity at Kate Ross, South Terrace, and Estella Maxey. So we're very pleased with the work that has been done on professional development and with technology to prepare for remote instruction. Moving on, and probably most importantly, we're refining our asynchronous plan, which defines what a school day will look like for our students who are working remotely. And we know parents want to know that information. Elementary students who are working remotely can expect to have a daily schedule that will look very similar to what it would look like as if they were in the school building. They will have a schedule that will designate blocks of time for their core subject areas, and then they will have designated times for other activities such as music, art, PE, or small group instruction. At the elementary level, students will be asked to log on for direct instruction. That's whole group, what we call synchronous instruction, which is similar to what we're doing right now, with their teachers at specified times for some subjects such as English language arts and math or science. And then for other subjects, they may work directly in Seesaw, the learning management system, to complete their assignments. So we are going to encourage our students to log on at the designated times for those courses according to the schedule that the teacher gives them in order to be a part of their class and to maximize learning. And that allows for the greatest interaction with the teachers, and our teachers will be able to check for understanding and clarify information for those students. Teachers will be asked to record lessons which have been provided synchronously or live, and the videos will be housed in the learning management system so that parents have access to assist their students in the evenings if the student was not able to be online at a designated time. And it's important to note that each student will be required to be engaged in instruction each day in order to be counted present for attendance purposes. So a student may be able to watch lessons and do assignments on the weekend, but they won't be counted present for a school day unless they're engaged each and every day of instruction. And so that's very important. We need our students working on assignments each day. They can be counted present for the day, even if they're working in the evening rather than during the day. However, we really want them to engage with their teachers at the designated times. It's also important to remember that the state is requiring us to enforce the 90% attendance requirement this year. Students must have a daily attendance rate of 90% or better in order to be promoted. Teachers, we have new teachers starting tomorrow. The rest of our teachers come back next week. They'll work with their campus principals to develop their daily schedules, and we are communicating sample schedules to our principals with the designated number of minutes for those synchronous subject areas, and we'll be communicating individual class schedules to parents prior to the first day of school. Also, as a part of the daily schedule, teachers will also communicate their office hours and availability to students and parents so that they know when and how to reach them for questions. For remote instruction, parents should expect that assignments will be graded using the same policy as for in-person instruction. This will be our pre-COVID grading policy, not the modified policy that we used in the spring when we shut down. So that's elementary. It looks and feels like a regular elementary day, except that you are doing that at home and you have some times that you're logged on for direct instruction and times that you're working independently in the learning management system. For secondary instruction, remote instruction will be similar to elementary in that students will be required to engage in instruction each day in order to be counted present for each course. Secondary students learning remotely will have a schedule that is similar to what they would be doing in person. In Waco ISD, that's an 8-period day. Teachers will communicate with students through Canvas. Some instruction will be provided directly at specified times, and there will also be periods of asynchronous instruction whereby students are working independently. Direct instruction will also be recorded for secondary students and available to students in their learning management system, Canvas. Again, I want to emphasize how critical it is that students are connected each day, even if it's up until 11:59 p.m. We need them to log on so that they can meet the 90% attendance requirement, so we can give them credit, and they must meet that for each and every course, so they have course credit on their transcripts. Once we have the majority of our students registered, we can finalize our schedules and distribute those to our families and students. Schedules will go out prior to the start of the school year, and secondary teachers will also communicate office hours and availability to their students and parents at that time. We're also using the same grading policy as for in-person instruction, and again, that's the grading policy that we used prior to our closures in the spring. So we're not using that. Modified grading policy is gone. We won't be using that anymore. And at this time, the only courses that we anticipate not being able to deliver 100% remotely are some advanced CTE courses that require specialized equipment and or direct supervision of hands-on activities. And our CTE department has been working through those situations and have some modified plans for those particular courses. So we're still registering students. We're still working through the master scheduling process for secondary. And I can't emphasize how critical it is that students complete the registration process as soon as possible. And they can do that at wacoisd.org/enroll. Let me say that again, wacoisd.org/enroll. Knowing how many students will be learning in person and how many will be working remotely is critical to our being able to continue to plan over the next 3 weeks for the upcoming school years. Families need to commit to their choice for at least the first 6 weeks grading period. For the beginning of this school year, that's going to be August the 25th. However, they can change their selection until 2 weeks before the start of each grading period. So we've told our principals we'll add that to our calendar with those deadlines for parents to change so that everyone knows what those dates are. Let me also mention that over the last couple of weeks, we have been meeting with our principals in small groups and some of our campuses and on some of our campuses to discuss PPE for our students and staff, the cleaning protocols, and other logistical preparations. And those visits out to schools went very well. We've also had regular check-in times on Zoom with our principals to ensure that we're all working in sync and we're troubleshooting. And there's plenty to troubleshoot. And so those conversations have been important. And then in addition, and I'm really proud of our principals for this, many of them, I think most of them have assembled their own task force committees to work through specific logistical pieces for their own campus and their own campus procedures. So I'm thankful for that. While we're preparing to start with both in-person and remote instruction, I've told my principals that they should also be prepared to start with all students learning remotely if the spread of the virus in our community warrants it. So we're planning to go, but we're also planning to pivot to 100% remote if we need to. We're going to continue to watch the numbers of lab confirmed cases in our community, as well as positivity and hospitalization rates. And we're staying in close contact with our local health experts. If we need to change direction, I will communicate that to our families as soon as I can. And with that, I am excited about welcoming our new teachers tomorrow. We have approximately 162, I think is the last number I got from Dr. Gutierrez, and I'm excited to greet them tomorrow morning, even if it's by Zoom. And we'll be greeting the remainder of our teachers next Wednesday, and then our students on September the 8th. And that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about the start of the school year.
It's a lot of information. A lot of good information, a lot of good work.
It is. Thank you.
I've been hearing a lot of positive feedback from teachers, and we had a comment in our chat from one of our principals thanking you for the Zoom meeting account for each of them. So,
oh, very nice. We hadn't been able to communicate that. We did that today. So, thank you.
does anybody have any questions?
Dr. Kincannon, I heard you mention CTE. But I didn't hear anything specific about it, which brought to mind Waco and Guam, and I'm sort of wondering what, a lot of that is, only meaningful if it's done, at least the lab portions, hands-on, in person. Is there a plan there? Are we sort of gonna get the book work out of the way first and then do the hands-on training later in the semester, or how are we approaching that?
There's a plan for each of those courses that have labs, and so there are pieces that can be done remotely, but there are some times that students will have to come in and do the lab work. And so our CTE department has developed a plan for each one of those. So I want to thank Donna McKethan and her team for that. And I know at Guama, they've done some alternative scheduling to make all of this work there. So, so we've got that managed, and we can communicate that to students. I have a spreadsheet with all of that information. I could provide you more, but I don't have that at my fingertips. But there's been extensive planning for that, because you're right. There's a lot of equipment involved, and some of it just can't be done remotely.
Yeah, it'd be hard to teach somebody to weld in a Zoom meeting.
Right.
And I'll assume you've done it. I'm just trying, I can't imagine how you coordinated with all the other schools that are participating in that.
Yes,
Yes, you have.
Our two directors are communicating with the other school districts, and I don't yet know how that will all work out in terms of enrollment, but we're working through that process as well. And so Candace Beckham and Dale McCall have been reaching out to partner school districts.
Alrighty, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question?
For the times where the students are supposed to be logged in with their teachers during the day, and you have a family where the parents are all working, or it's a single parent with multiple children, having to get on to is each school handling that differently, or is there more kind of a district level guidance for how they're going to handle those kinds of things?
Yeah, so we've worked as a district to implement the learning management system to provide all the tools that will allow for the recording of instruction. And so we're asking teachers to record those direct instructional pieces so that parents can access them after hours. The attendance procedures will be standardized across the district. And so everyone will be counting engagement in a similar way. However, there is a little bit of gray in that, because you're looking at individual assignments and how students are logged on. So we've been working through that accounting piece on the with Region 12 and with our PEMS department. What may be different for families from school to school or from classroom to classroom is the actual individual classroom schedule. So if I was a fourth grade teacher and a fifth grade teacher, so my fourth grade schedule at my campus might look different than a fourth grade schedule at another campus. So I might be teaching reading at a different time, and parents might be logging on or students might be logging on at a different time, but that should be the major difference. The other thing that I didn't mention is that we've been working diligently to get curriculum units in place, and so those scope and sequence documents are going to be more in sync across the district this year too. So that content will be taught at similar times, maybe not with the exact same lesson, because we want teachers to have the flexibility to teach and create their lessons, but they'll be teaching those same standards. So there'll be a lot of continuity, a lot more continuity than in the spring, and parents will be able to complete assignments with their students, help their students, not complete them for them, hopefully, but work with their students up until midnight each evening. So all of those technology tools that I mentioned are really important, and those are available to all of our teachers so that we can standardize that.
And I'm sorry, you mentioned the percentage of students that had already signed up online versus in person, and I was writing and I missed it. Do you mind repeating that information?
Not at all. We have about 56% who have selected remote instruction currently, and we have 7,999 as of today who have made that selection, even though we have over 10,000 who have completed the registration process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think that's really good. We just need a big push this next week to get the remainder of our students in the system so we can finish master scheduling and make those teacher assignments.
Dr. Kincannon,
Yes.
with all the communication that's gone on through your planning processes this summer, the extensive amount of interaction that's had to play through different communication channels, have you and your staff felt the need to redefine any linkages from a communication standpoint at the start of the school year to perhaps more rapidly distribute information as it becomes available? Opportunities for improvement, problems that may develop, and how to resolve those in a efficient manner, I guess, from a communication standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest parts, and starting 3 weeks later has been greatly beneficial to us in keeping the team in sync, because we've been able to be methodical. And the downside of that is we can see people who have already started who have communicated things that we haven't yet. And so there's a sense that we want to go faster, but yet we're right on par to where we need to be, I think. We do want to send out some communication to families about that asynchronous plan, and we'll be updating, we'll send out an email with that information, and then we'll also update our websites so that that's clear for them. So, we do have a little bit of more work to do there, but every day something's changing, just like adding that Zoom licensing today. And so those regular meetings that we're having with our principals are just critical to keeping the team on the same page so that we're not all going in different directions. And that would be easy. That would happen easily with 26 schools. So staying connected to each other, and I've encouraged our principals to keep communicating with their teachers and make sure teachers know what we know, and we don't have all of the answers, and but we'll continue to work through them, and we'll give them what we have when we have it. And I think that's helping.
It just seems like the speed and accuracy of information and exchange is going to be very, very critical going forward. So
it really is, and thank you for pointing that out. That can be one of the most difficult pieces, and we've had a couple of places where we've had to stop and regroup, and
Sure.
That's just because there's too many of us, right? And so we've got to stop and say, nope, let's get on the same page here. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Nelson. Dr. Nelson. Dr. Kincannon.
Yes, sir.
All right. Do the individual campuses have a plan for emergencies for COVID-19, or is there a district-wide plan?
Yes, we have a district plan, and then we have our head nurse has walked every campus to talk about isolation spaces. And part of those campus walks was really just to see what the physical spaces look like, to see what we needed to add. So we've pushed out PPE, stickers, hand sanitizer, barriers for reception areas and dividers for workspaces. We're pushing all of that out, but some of that is campus specific. And then responding to kids that have positive cases, whether it be kids or adults, we'll be handling that with the campus. So Rhiannon Settles is our head nurse, and she'll be our direct contact with the public health district and coordinating with each one of our principals.
Dr. Kincannon, to follow up on both Alan and Norman's questions about communication and campus by campus plans, I have heard, especially from secondary, that parents are getting conflicting information from maybe individual teachers or individual departments. And so I guess my question is, when can parents expect to have definitive answers about the classes that are being offered to their students at the secondary level? And when they have questions about what they're hearing, who should they be contacting?
Sure. We, after this meeting, we'll be pushing information out to parents to explain the asynchronous instructional model. We did have some teachers who got a little bit ahead of us in communicating with students, and so that created a little bit of a concern with some parents. And we cannot make decisions about scheduling until we get the students registered in the system. So the sooner our students are registered, the sooner we can assign those master schedules and get them completed and get schedules out. So I would, if I were a parent, I would not expect to see that schedule until closer to the start of the school day. But I would not, school year, September 8th. So I would not be bothered by that. That's just the way it is this year with the having to assign either in person or remote. And so it's going to take us some time to work through that process. If there's a particular question about a course, they can email the principal or even our curriculum staff to ask questions. And I will tell you at this time, except for some really specialized courses, we're planning for virtual remote courses and in-person sections. But I can't guarantee that until we have all of the students in the system.
Thank you.
Master scheduling is complicated, especially at the high school level.
Does anybody else have a question? And that included the next item on your report, which is back to school registration, right? You covered everything.
I think so. And as questions arise, we'll address those, and I'll provide you with an update at our next meeting on August the 27th.
Okay. Well, and I just want to remind everybody that we will meet again before the start of school on the 27th of August. And we'll ask Dr. Kincannon to give us another report then and a recommendation about continuing with the calendar and the dual instruction model that we have. But if at that time the board feels like, and based on expert advice and guidance we're being provided by our city and county leaders and health experts, we still have time to make adjustments. So that is an advantage to having a calendar that was pushed back until September the 8th. So we still have a little time. But we're not going to be able to make good decisions if we don't have everybody registered. So that is really, really important and critical that everybody get their kids enrolled and make it a choice.
I have another question.
Yes, sir. That's the number one thing that parents could help us with right now is just to get registered.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Manning.
Mhm.
Dr. Quintana.
Yes.
Okay, you said I think you said we have you're gonna meet 162 new teachers tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Where are we as far as that is concerned? Are we short? Do we need more or what?
Yeah, the last I heard, we needed to fill about 12 to 15 positions. And last year, we started with subs in some classrooms, and our goal is not to do that this year. And we also have improved on our retention rate. So last year we had about 220 new teachers. This year we're sitting at about 162. So that's over 50 better. So we're doing really well. I'm really pleased with the progress that Dr. Gutierrez and her team has made, and our principals have worked really hard to get staffing done. So I think we're in a good spot. But we have 3 weeks, and we need to get those positions filled.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, next is our consent agenda. They're items A through I. Is there any item on the consent agenda that any member of the board would like to have pulled for further discussion?
Are we gonna vote on this again tonight?
Are you talking about what?
Once again, we're given the consent agenda, have to vote on it the same day we get it.
Oh, yes, we are voting on the consent agenda that was posted 3 days ago in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. If there's any item that you would like to have pulled for discussion or an item you'd like to move be tabled till a later date, you are free to do so. Okay, hearing no items to be pulled, I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented.
I'll make a motion to accept the agenda as posted.
Thank you, Mr. Vidania.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Sykes. Is there any further discussion about the items in the consent agenda? Hearing none. All those in favor of adopting the consent agenda as presented, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. Next is Ms. Davis. The next two items. First is review and discuss the proposed budget and tax rate for the 2021 fiscal year. And after that, consider taking action regarding notice of our public meeting to adopt the tax rate and discuss the budget. Hi, Cheryl.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, so Josh, are you going to share you want to share the screen or? Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk tonight about our proposed budgets for the 2021 school year. We have a number of budgets that we do adopt every year. Go on to the, okay. So a little bit of a background first, just some legal issues. We have three budgets, three funds that are in our official budget. That's our general operating fund, where most of our operations are accounted for, our child nutrition fund, and our debt service fund. You all also adopt three other funds that we act, they're fiscal year funds, and we act as a fiscal agent for those. And so they are also adopted, but they're not really part of our official budget. And that is the budgets for Guama, Waca, the Challenge Academy, the JJAEP for the county, and then the Regional Day School Program for the deaf. We have a lot of other budgets in the district that we do actually budget. They are other special revenue funds, grant funds, and those are considered, the budgets are considered adopted by the granting agency. So you all don't see those as part of the official budget. The budget must be developed in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. I only put that in there this time because generally accepted accounting principles are going to play a big issue in this next year's budget. That means the budget's built on a modified accrual basis. Revenues are recognized when they're received. Expenditures are recognized when services are rendered or goods are received. For districts with a September 1st through August 31st fiscal year, they have to be prepared, the budget has to be prepared no later than August 20th and presented to the board, which we're doing tonight, and then it must be adopted by August 31st. Again, and also the tax rate, the budget has to be adopted prior to approving the tax rate. We do typically do our public hearing on the budget and tax rate, and then the prior to the regular meeting in August, and then we do those same adopting of those two items later in that same meeting. Going on to the next slide, there are a number of unique issues impacting this budget. This is my 32nd budget that I have brought forward to a board to approve since I started working for school districts, and this is the craziest one we've ever had. So it's been a real challenge this year. We have, like I said, there's a number of issues. We are continuing with the special ed identification, the increased identification. TEA lifted the cap on special education in 2018. And so in the last this past budget year and this coming year, we have had a lot of increase. We'll see that when we talk about our increases in staffing. It does come with some revenue. Unfortunately, special ed revenue usually doesn't cover the cost of those services. We do have continued implementation of House Bill 3. We started last year with the compression of the local maintenance and operations tax rate. That continues this coming year. We'll look at how that further compresses. Before COVID-19, we were losing revenues from falling interest rates, and we had this past year a lot of increased appeals and property values and decreased collections. Those have just been, I think, further impacted with closures and business closures. So we're looking at that continuing into next year. We've got a much lower tax collection rate certified for this coming year. We've also got, of course, all the issues arising from the pandemic and the school closures. There is a tremendous loss in state revenue from sales and other taxes that has been, some of those holes have been plugged with the federal stimulus funds. And so we've got sort of an interplay between our state foundation school program revenue and our federal revenues in both the current and next year. We have had declines in enrollment resulting from the average daily attendance that generate the district's revenue and some of the way that the state is calculating those. And then, of course, we have other revenue losses due to school closures. We've talked about before, our tuition, our after-school tuition, extracurricular activity, fees that we get, even, football, athletic revenue. So we've had a lot of losses there. When we look at the food service fund, there have been we had a lot lower participation rates with the school closures. And so you'll see that impact of loss in revenue on that fund as well. In addition to that, of course, we've had those increased costs. We've talked at the last couple of meetings. I think last time we reported that we had almost $1 million in protective supplies and equipment that we have purchased so far. And then also we have had a lot of increased expenditure in technology for remote instruction. Some of that we had planned on to begin with for the year, and then we have made additional expenditures. We've had some funding that has helped us with that, and we'll talk about that as we talk about the federal funds. And then the one thing that is new, we have not talked about up to this point when we're talking about budget, is the delay of the start for the 2021 school year. As I said, this budget has to be developed based on generally accepted accounting principles. So those 10 days of work for our teachers and instructional aides and other numbers of days for people like school librarians and nurses and assistant principals, all those days are now getting pushed into the next fiscal year. So for that 187-day calendar that our teachers and instructional aides are on, they actually will have 10 extra days, assuming that we go back to some traditional calendar for the 21-22 school year and start where we historically have started mid-August. There will be 10 extra work days in next year. Now, that helps this year's budget. So instead of showing a loss in this year's budget, we probably will end up in the black. At least I'm projecting that at this point. But it does create about a $4 million hit in next year's budget. So we'll look at that in a few minutes. But those are some of the things that make this budget a little bit different than it has been. Looking at our ADA and our enrollments, this is our 10-year trend in enrollment and average daily attendance. You can see that even though we were actually up in enrollment this past year, the 10-year trend is still down about 2.3%. That has actually been running closer to 4%, so that's an improvement. However, the ADA really, with the losses in the spring, didn't keep up with that same gain that we saw in enrollment. Go on. Okay, next slide. This is the calculation. We've looked at how they were going to calculate the 1920 school year with ADA for funding purposes before. With the 5th and 6th weeks being closed, they took that average from the prior year and applied it to the average for the first 4. Now, for the 2021 school year, TEA has gone in and calculated a hold harmless target for the school district. As I've said to some people, some days you just get lucky. So we did get lucky on this one because they used the 2017-18 ADA for this calculation and the 3-year trend leading up to that. Well, we had a very good enrollment in ADA in 2017-18. Plus, the trend leading up to that started with the 2015-16 school year. And that's when we started the free dual credit. And so from that point on, we had some significant increases in enrollment each year, mostly at the high school level, but that did set this trend for the district. And that has helped us a lot with the way they're going to calculate ADA for next year. So the first 2 6 weeks are going to be held harmless at that amount. And as you can see, our ADA for the last 2 years has been 13.3 in that range. Well, they're going to have us at 13.537 for the first 2 6 weeks. So that is higher than we've been. Now, that said, for the next 4 6 weeks to kind of offset that, this is one of the areas I'm still very uncomfortable with on what that attendance is going to look like. So I did go down a little bit from what we were talking about before, and I'm using a 98% attendance rate for those other 4 6 weeks. Hopefully, towards the end of the year, that will come up. But because those first two are being held harmless, I went ahead and went a little bit lower for the next 4-6 weeks. So we're using an ADA of 13,241 in developing the revenues for this budget. Okay, next slide. So this is what our property values look like for 2021. These are we started out with our preliminary values of 7.6 million, are certified, and these are not certified values at this point. This is a certified estimate. The chief appraiser was not able to certify the roll at 95%, so he was not able to certify the values. He gave us a certified estimate. The law does allow us to use a certified estimate in establishing the tax rate, and TEA did allow that in calculating our maximum compressed rate. So right now we are using the certified estimate of 7.2 billion. Now, one of the things we still have 2,136 properties. At that time when they certified the estimate, there's 2,136 properties with a market value of over 2.4 billion that were still under protest. And that is partially why they have certified a lower collection rate for this year. But that is a little bit lower gain than what we've seen in the last 5 years. It's 5.74 over last year's certified values. Okay, go on. Next slide. So this is what the revenue is going to look like. Our adopted M&O rate for 2019 tax year was $1.6835. The state, this is a whole new calculation for us with this new compressed rate and the way this is going to happen. The state projected the statewide property value growth percentage to be 4.01%. And that would give a state compressed tax rate from the 93 cents it was compressed to this current year. It would be 91.64. Now, our value growth was higher than the 4.01 at the 5.74. So therefore, our maximum compressed rate will be lower than what that state compressed tax rate was. Our maximum compressed rate will be 90.15 cents. This is the M&O rate. And so that's our maximum tier 1 rate. Now, we have previously passed a TRE, so we still have eligible golden and copper pennies. Districts that had not passed a TRE or were not at the $1.04 were able to do either 4 or 5 cent additional cents this year. It was 4 cents or 5 cents if you had a unanimous vote from the board, but because we had the TRE already in place, we're not eligible for those pennies because we're already above that. So we still have 8 golden pennies and 5.83 copper pennies. That will give us a total M&O rate for the 2020 tax year of $3.98 cents. Compared to that $6.83 that we had last year. So that's almost a 3 cent reduction in the M&O tax rate. On the debt service side, our total, go back. No. So our total debt service for next year will be $13,651,000. We are expecting to receive about $293,000 in state aid. That's part of a hold harmless for districts. So our adjusted debt service requirements will be $13,357,000. And we have an anticipated collection rate. This is what the tax office has certified for us of 96%. Again, this is about 2.5% lower than our current tax rate collection has been. So that is also impacting our revenues. The total INS tax rate then for this coming year is 22.4 cents. Again, that's also about a penny less than it was last year. That gives us a total combined tax rate for the year of $1.2639 cents. And that's compared to about $1.30 last year. Okay, go on. Looking at then that revenue estimate for the district in both the M&O and INS side, with that $7.2 billion in estimated value, and our adjusted levy, it'll give us an adjusted levy, total levy of $87.2 million. 71.7 of that will be in the general fund from the M&O rate, and then 15.4 of that in the INS fund. Now, we don't get to keep all of that money because we participate in that TIF. We do have, we'll show the breakdown there of our current tax collections. We still have about $1.1 million in prior years collections, most of that in the general fund. And then we collect a substantial amount on penalties and interest, almost $1 million of that every year. Our collections for the TIF, we give about $8 million of that back to the TIF, which is passed through to the TIF zone. That impacts the M&O fund, about $6.8 million of that from M&O, and then INS about $1.5 million. Now, the state does hold us harmless in our calculation of our foundation school program revenue, and we do have an adjustment for those collections in the TIF. We get a value adjustment, and then because we have to pay into the TIF based on the 2005-06 tax rate, which was about $1.45, the state does give us over $2 million in supplemental funding to help make up that difference between that $1.45 tax rate and what our current tax rate is. However, that's not the case on our debt service side. That money that goes out to the TIF on the debt service side, while we can set a tax rate that covers that, we don't get held harmless by the state for that amount that goes into the TIF. So this is what you see is our total estimated tax revenue of $63.6 million in the M&O fund and $14.3 million in the INS fund. So that is a decrease in tax revenue in both cases because we have the lower rates. So we're decreasing the local tax revenue by about $1.7 million. Okay, next slide. And this is then what our overall general fund revenues will look like. They are down. I've presented what our adopted budget was for last year, what we're projecting for this year we're in right now, and then what the proposed budget looks like. You can see there in the middle, the state foundation school revenue. We did adopt a budget of $82.5 million. Right now, our projected actual is $76 million. Again, we've talked about it before, but that the ESSER money coming from under the CARES Act, that $4.9 million will actually be a reduction to our state foundation school program revenue. And then that will be accounted for in a special revenue fund outside of this budget. Now, those funds are still available to us to use, but they just are not going to be reflected in the general fund. We'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with this money on the next couple of slides. So our proposed budget is right at $79 million for our state foundation school program. Now that is about $3.5 million less, about $3.5 million less than what it was in the prior year. And our our property tax is running right even with what it was last year. So we don't really see much of a gain that we typically would see between those two. Again, most of that is because of that lower ADA. The other big categories here, right below that state foundation school program revenue, you see the TRS on behalf revenue. That is up quite a bit. We've had a TRS increase for next year. The district will pick up a little bit more of the share next year. And you see the projected number in the middle is 7.7 million, quite a bit higher than what we adopted and even higher than what it will be for this coming year. That is because the state, in the 86th legislative session, they actually bumped TRS, put a big, I'm not exactly sure how many billions of dollars they put into TRS, but our share of that was about $600,000. So we're recognizing that. We have to recognize that on behalf revenue and expenditure in this current year. So that looks a little funny there that it goes up for that projected amount, but that is the reason why. The rest of our revenues, our Medicaid reimbursements are down from prior years by about $500,000, and I have kind of kept those down for this coming year. I've actually increased our indirect cost recovery a little bit because we had some delays in our federal program spending, but we will actually get some of that indirect cost back next year as those pick up again. So we went from an adopted budget of 164.5 million in revenue. Looks like because of the switch between the federal revenue and the state revenue, we'll end up with about 157.2 million this year, and we're budgeting 160.5 million in next year. So that is about a $4 million decrease from our adopted budget for 2019-20. I also have just included there, we're still getting the money that is additional for the aid to contract to operate district campuses. This is for our transformation zone. That first year or so, we got over $3 million. With the House Bill 3 and the change in the funding structure, that dropped to about $2 million, and that stays pretty flat going into next year. Okay, next slide. So this is the federal funding we've been talking about some. I've got kind of listed out some of these different programs that are coming in. The big one, as we talked about, was the ESSER grant. That was almost $5 million for us. We originally thought we were going to have to give the private nonprofit schools about $250,000 because originally they told us we were going to have to allocate it based on all students enrolled in the private nonprofit schools. That did get changed, and the allocation is just to the low socioeconomic kids enrolled in those schools. So that went from $250,000 to about $61,000. So we are going to end up getting about, like I said, we're still right at $5 million. We are part of what we'll see as we project the current year. We have already identified a number of expenditures that we've made in 2019-20 that we are going to move to that special revenue fund and charge to that $4.9 million. There was the $2 million in the student and teacher device replacement that we that you all approved, I think, in late April. Those orders went in either late May or early June. So those expenditures were moving to that funding. We also, after that, did a one-to-one device initiative with Chromebooks of right at $600,000. And then we did the district-wide Microsoft 365 license. So right now we have about 2.7 million in expenditures. We're going to move out of this budget that use up part of that $5 million we're getting from the feds. Those funds can be carried over. That $2.3 million will carry over, or whatever we end up with, will carry over, and actually we can spend them into 2022. If we ask for an extension, it will be June of 2021 without that extension, but I don't think we'll have any problems within the next 2 years spending those funds. And they will kind of supplement as we kind of look at the 2021 budget, so we can, our second phase of technology can be spent under those funds in this coming year. So then the next set of funding that we received was the CRF. Now this, we were originally told that our allotment was going to be capped at $50,000. And so these had to be any expenditures that were incurred between March 1st and May 20th of 2020. And they could not have been included in the approved budget as of March 27th. So we have gone back and looked at all the expenditures that we made that would fall under that criteria. And unfortunately, we've only been able to identify about 546,000. I think it's actually a little bit less than that because we had to take a few things out this week. They will reimburse us for 75% of that. That's about $409,000. We were notified that our allotment is going to be $1.2 million 2 weeks ago. But that was, 2 months after the end of the period where we could have spent the money. So that a lot of districts are in the same boat with this because we were just gearing up our expenditures. And so that we're not really going to get to take complete advantage of. Go on to the next slide. So we have a second piece of the CRF funds. This is actually from the state allotment. The governor had decided to institute a program he's calling Operation Connectivity. And so the district was eligible for a matching fund of 50% of expenditures, and that depends on your economically disadvantaged students. We are using those funds, and you just approved that interlocal agreement and purchase on the consent agenda. But we have committed those funds for device replacements to purchase 2,200 mobile hotspots and an additional 3,450 Chromebooks. The total cost of that purchase is $1.2 million. Our match for that is $591,000. So we did have to wire funds to them this week because they are doing a huge bulk purchase across the state to get us the deal that they're getting on this. So those funds were wired on Monday to Region 4, who's making that purchase. The other piece of funding that we do have is the personal protective equipment allotment that the state has sent to us. We have received masks and gloves and hand sanitizer, face shields and thermometers. And so the value of that equipment is $136,000. So that's helped us with what we've had to spend from our general fund for that same type of equipment. Okay, next slide. So this is what it looks like. Just don't have heart failure when you see the deficit. Okay, so it looks like let's start with the 2019-20 projected actuals there in the middle. As I said, we're projecting about $157.2 million in total revenues. The expenditures have come down because we are moving those $2.7 million out to the special revenue fund. So our expenditures right now appear to be about $155.9 million, with that would give revenues over expenditures of $1.3 million. We have other sources from our auction of $42,000, and then the operating transfers to our day school for the deaf and to Guamaguaca of $576,000 to cover their year-end deficits, because we cannot let those funds go into a deficit position. That will give us right at $800,000 in the black. Our fund balance at the beginning of the year was $49.2 million. We'll end up right at $50 million. We do have some commitments on that, on the fund balance, we have unspendable amounts. That's our inventory that is in the warehouse of about 404,000. What you see, that restricted fund balance there, it started out the year at 1.1 million, should end up at about 1.6 million. That is the fund balance for the zone. We are required to restrict that fund balance because that does belong to them as long as they're in existence. So that is what is right now. It's looking like their ending fund balance will be for the 2019-20 school year. The committed fund balance is what it looks like we're going to have in projects that have not completed, and then our bus replacement money. So that's right at 4 million, gives us an unassigned fund balance of $44 million. Looking at next year's budget now, again, we're up. Our revenues from the adopted budget are down by right at $4 million, up from our projected because of those federal funds coming in. It's $160.5 million. On the expenditure side, our adopted budget is not a lot higher than what we started out with in our original budget. It's about $700,000 higher. We will see, with that, revenues over expenditures are about expenditures over revenue. We've got a deficit, and as I keep saying, this is not considered by TEA or as a deficit budget because we have fund balance to cover this. We do have expenditures over revenues of $4.6 million. And again, we will have that, we'll need to supplement the Guama Guaca Fund and the Day School for the Deaf by about $664,000. So that budgetarily, we would be drawing down the fund balance by 5.2 million. Again, that beginning fund balance is right at 50 million. So with those restricted amounts, it looks, and the zone will be drawing down their fund balance as well, because they like the district, we have the extra 10 days of instructional salaries in our budgets. So they'll draw that down by about 800,000 and with an ending position of about 800,000. So we'll have an ending unassigned fund balance of about 40.6 million. So go on to the next slide. So let's just look at that a little bit on what makes up those pieces, especially on that, makes up that deficit. As I said, we end up with a decrease in fund balance of 5.2 million. We had in this last year's budget, 6,550,000. I left the 50,000 off because 50,000 was for a police vehicle, and I did leave that in the budget this year. So we have not budgeted $6.5 million worth of maintenance projects, safety projects, technology and vehicles, bus replacements that we funded this past year. We have, so our source of revenues, if you look at the bottom, is 11.7 million. We have a revenue loss, as I said, of just under $4 million. Those additional days due to the calendar change, and this is just the general funds portion, there is some of those are picked up by particularly Title I, and our food service program is particularly hard hit with that change in days. But the impact on the general fund is just under $3.3 million. The salary increase that was approved, the 1%, is 1.5 million. We have teacher retirement. There was an increase in the teacher retirement, and then the impact of the other benefit increases was of both of those things, because part of those additional days have benefit impact to them, is 748,000. We had new positions added to the budget of 1.4 million. Over $1 million of that is in special education staffing. As we talked about, we've had a big increase increase in identification. We've had an increase in revenue, but the staffing was right at $1 million. We approved additional requests. This is a lot smaller than we normally have in a year. And most of this is in software increases, but it does include a $97,000 increase in our campus non-payroll allocations and $75,000 that we've put aside for costs associated with implementing the new teacher incentive allotment. So we've got some startup costs there, but we approved $411,000 of additional requests. So that's basically the 11.7 million in our revenue source. We have gone through the budget. I've got some cleaned up some things. We've got some contingencies built into the budget that were done within the budget itself. I budgeted an additional $300,000 contingency for substitute costs. I budgeted an additional $300,000 for in health services for PPE that we might run into after the start of the year if it's not covered by some of our federal allocations. So we've done some of those things within the budget where we cleaned up some of the maybe over budgeting in some areas and made some cuts in others, but we do have some contingency funds built in for those things. Okay, so next slide. This is what the salary increase, it comes out as my salary increase because of the way I apply these as we're building the salary proposal. So the base amount and this is for the whole district, what you see that bottom line in the blue is for the entire all fund sources. General fund is shown on the last line down below. But the base amount totaled $108 million in salaries. You can see the breakout by each employee group there. And then the second column is the raise amount of the 1.8 million from the TASB study that was recommended. Of that, 1.5 million belongs to the general fund, and the rest of that is in our other special revenue funds and food service. The extra days in total cost the district $5 million. 3.2 million of that is in the general fund. As I said, the food service fund was hard hit with that. And then Title I, our IDEA, our Perkins money, a lot of those other funds were also picked up some of those extra days. As always, I go back and look at each employee group and see what the historical pattern of salary savings has been over and above what we do for increases. And so I apply a percentage to each of these groups for salary savings. You can see that the paraprofessional aides comparatively with some of the other groups is a pretty large amount percentage-wise because we do have high turnover in our aides. And so, like I said, those percentages that I apply are based on our actual historical experience in those groups. So I took out $1.7 million or $1.8 million from our base salaries and $1.7 million of it in the general fund. And so our total salaries are $114.9 million with $97.5 million in the general fund. That's up about $3 million over last year. Okay, go on to the next slide. I put this in here because we haven't looked at this in a while. This is the allocations because the transformation zone generates foundation school program revenue. They generate both a tier 1, actually 3, tier 1 allotment and a tier 2 allotment, and then they do receive the charter school facilities allotment to help with their custodial and staffing and supplies and utilities. And then, of course, they generate TRS on behalf payments for their TRS payments. So I show their enrollment there and their average daily attendance, and for each of those campuses, what they are generating in those allotments. They also, from that, they have a total general fund revenue of $26.2 million. From those campus allotments, we take several different pots of money. So the first thing is we tried the first year to leave each campus with their special ed allotment and have their fund staff, but because different programs are on different campuses and some are much more expensive than others, that really didn't work well. So we have pulled the zone's special education revenue out into a central budget, and then we budget for that all in the central zone budget, so we can budget for all the different programs. We also take a percentage out. 4% of their allocation comes out for their operations management budget, and all of those funds stay within the zone, and so there's about 21.9 million staying in the zone of revenue. They also pay the district for a number of things. We have optional purchase services that the campuses choose whether or not they want to participate in. For the middle schools, that will include middle school athletics and middle school fine arts. And of course, they do participate in those. It includes some activities where more in the instructional area, whether they want, because in some cases they choose to do their own thing in the zone, and in some cases they participate in our district services. One example of that would be dyslexia. They do make use of our dyslexia specialists in providing services, so they buy the dyslexia services from us. The other item you see there is administrative services. That runs about 13%. That we charge them for all of those other administrative type services. They pay for, and that's all of our Function 41, Function 21, our program administration for our special programs areas. They pay for plant maintenance and operation. A portion of that goes for technology services, security services, and all of that. But they give us back about $3.1 million for those services. So in total, the general fund, district's general fund, gets back about $4.6 million of the revenues that they generate for services. Okay, next slide. This just looks at what our unassigned fund balance looks like. So while it's going to be going down this year with that deficit, it's certainly not the lowest fund balance we've had, and it's a budgeted fund balance where the rest of those numbers tend to be actual, or are actual, or the projected actual for this past year. So hopefully we may have under expenditure next year as well, and that will end up looking a little bit better than it does now. But I remind you of where you were back in 1994-95 at no fund balance, and so we are in good shape. We still, even with this, we still will end up with about a 24.6% unassigned fund balance, and so that's what we have it for, is to weather these unexpected kinds of storms. Okay, next slide. So the things that I guess I am still somewhat concerned about is the enrollment and attendance and the uncertainty of what that might be. We did have requests for about $2.5 million in maintenance improvements. Safety improvements last year, we put about $800,000 in that. But we also this year received 2 grants. One was a COPS grant a federal grant, and then the school safety grant from the state. And so we actually were able to do a lot of the projects we intended to do, camera replacements and, secure entrances and some of those things. We were able to do a lot of those projects and save most of the money that we had put aside in our general fund to do that with these other funding sources. We did, on the COPS grant, we did have to spend $162,000 as our match, but the money that we've spent for the one-on-one initiative with the Chromebooks, a lot of that came from money that we had saved here. We used some of this money to expand on projects that we had planned for a future year. We're working on PA systems at all the campuses, and we did replace fire alarms, our fire alarm panels. And so we don't have as much need in this coming year for those safety projects because of that. Technology replacement, we had 1.2 million of that. However, we do have those unused ESSER funds of 2.3 million that we will be able to use for the technology replacements that we would have done with the general fund. And then the last thing is our bus replacements of 700,000 that we do each year. So the two things probably that are maybe we need to probably look at again would be those maintenance improvements and the vehicle replacements. I think the other is in good shape for this coming year, but those two things we may want to bring back depending on how we kind of end up this year. And once we get a look at what our enrollment is after September 1st, we may want to come back and amend some money in. We've done that in the past, come back in September or October and amended fund balance in for projects. So that might be something that we still want to look at after the first of the year. Okay, I think that's,
Carol,
so then we have,
Carol?
That's it. Okay, go ahead.
Before you leave the general fund, the maintenance improvements, 2.5 million, those are identified projects. Do we have have we seen a prioritized list of those, or is that under, I guess, being developed?
No, that's why it's been, maintenance has developed some, but, and we saw it last year, a lot of it's a carryover from, they had a 5-year plan last year, and so it's just a carryover from that. And
Okay.
they have, they've got something worked up, but because we couldn't fund it, I have not brought that forward. We will bring forward an identified list before we amend in any funds.
Okay, thank you.
And besides, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
That's fine.
Okay, we're ready to go on. Okay, so here's looking at our other budgets. This is the other one that is somewhat of concern, is our child nutrition fund. They were hit hard this year. We did have actually got a finding from Texas Department of Agriculture that we had an excess fund balance in the food service, and we were supposed to be spending it down. And we were trying to spend it for some equipment and doing some new serving lines, and we did some new vehicles and all, but we certainly had no problem spending that budget down this year. So again, revenue had a significant revenue loss with the decrease in participation in those last couple of months of the year. We did move, once we went into the curbside feeding, we actually went into a summer feeding program. And so a lot of our expenditures and revenues have moved to the summer feeding program. But until that went into effect, some of our costs, of course, for food service were already made, and our fixed costs of salaries, and we did keep everybody on working. So we had expenditures of about right under $10 million with only 8.6 million in revenues. So it looks like we're going to draw down that fund balance by about $1.4 million. Although originally on those CRF funds, when I thought we were going to get 50,000, I had not expected to fund any of our additional costs in food service, but we did have some costs for coolers and things of that nature that we don't typically use in the program, but when we were doing curbside service, we had to purchase a lot of those type of items. So we are also going to help out the food service program a little bit with some of those CRF funds, since we ended up getting the $1.2 million. Anyway, so we will have an ending projected fund balance at this point of about 2.4 million. Going into next year, I think, Cliff, we're being very conservative at this point. It looks like about 6.7 million in federal program revenue in our food service reimbursements, which will be right about 7 million for total revenues. About 8.2 million he did budget lower amount for food costs, but again, for our existing employees, we did have to pick up more days in this next fiscal year. And we actually ended up with a few more days than the teachers, because while the teachers did come back, are coming back on the 19th, we actually pushed the food service back a little further. So almost all their days. I think we only have maybe 1 or 2 days in this fiscal year. They're all going to be pushed into next year. So it looks like we'll have, now, one of the things we're going to do to mitigate that, we have a lot of vacancies in food service right now. So until we know what this is going to look like, we're not going to be filling all of those positions. So right now it looks like we'll have about $1.2 million that we're projecting for another decrease in that fund balance. We hope to make that a little bit better by not filling some of those positions. We've also kind of reworked the curbside feeding for the students that are doing remote learning, where we still have a curbside feeding program. It will, after talking to the principals and getting feedback, we've kind of changed that a little bit. We're going to be doing it probably 2 evenings a week and give multiple days of food that the parents can come and pick up. And we'll do it more, after hours, where the parents can get there and pick up the food. It'll be a little bit different from the way it was this spring. We were allowed, once we went into the summer feeding program, we could feed kids regardless of what district they belong to. That's not the case once we go back into our regular food service program. They will have to show ID, and they'll have to be enrolled in a Waco ISD school. But looking at that, I had a beginning fund balance, or projected beginning fund balance, of 2.4 million. Should have an ending fund balance of about 1.3 million, or 15%, which is still, in TDA's opinion, probably a very healthy fund balance. Okay, go on to the next one. And then this is our debt service fund. Of course, the debt service fund is not really impacted by the things that we've been talking about, because there are no salaries, and there was some loss in revenue because of the collections being down this past year. We had expected to collect about $15.6 million in property taxes, between property taxes and investment income, and that looks like that's going to be down almost 600,000 from what we had expected. Most of that decline is in property tax collections, although, like I said, some of that is in investment income because of those lower interest rates. We did receive and state program revenue, 335,000. When we adopted the budget this past year, we weren't sure that we were going to, that program was still in effect, because it wasn't popping up on anybody's templates, but we did end up getting those funds. And as I said, we'll get about 293,000 coming in for this next year. It looks like at this point, although I have not budgeted for that at this point. On the expenditure side, we did defease some of our bonds in February, about $600,000 worth of bonds. So if you'll go back. And so our debt service schedule, we have about 13.7 million in debt payments and interest and principal, and then there's our TIF for the debt service fund of about $1.5 million. Then we should have an excess of revenues over expenditures of about 289,000. Normally I get that a little bit closer. This is still within the our ability to calculate that tax rate, but with the uncertainties of the collections, I went ahead and let that increase a little bit more than I normally would do, but gives us an ending fund balance of about $4.3 million. Now, we are looking at maybe doing a refunding on the August 27th meeting, because with the rates falling as much as they have, the long-term rates, it looks like we can probably refund bonds. It won't give us any savings in this coming year, but at the current rates, I shouldn't, this is good news for the 27th, but at the current rates, we could have present value savings of over 12% and $7 million through the life of those bonds till 2038, I think is when they end. So that would be really good news for us. It's about a penny of tax each year. Okay, so then the last three budgets, as I said, are the three that we're the fiscal agent for. Our Greater Waco Advanced Academies. That deficit looks like it's going to be a little more than it has been. That has really improved, as you can see. 2018-19, we had a deficit of 628,000 that we had to make up. This year, only 115,000. But again, 10 days less of teacher salaries in the 2019-20 budget. 10 days more in next year. So we'll be back around 178,000, which we had budgeted 184,000 in the current year. So that's about where I would expect it to be. But then again, that does impact the general fund with that transfer that we do for the 178,000. Okay, next one. This is the Challenge Academy. The Challenge Academy is always a challenge every year, because we never know what the participation is going to look like from one year to the next. It was very high this year. We ended up with about just over $1 million in revenue. That's up from 800,000 last year, and 841,000 in expenditures. So we ended up with revenues over expenditures in this year of 161,000. Again, a little bit of that is because of the 10 days, although there's only about 4 teachers at the Challenge Academy and probably about 6 aides over there. So we did end up in the black, 161,000. That gives us a little bit better ending unearned revenue of 255,000, better than what we have had. But going into next year, we may end up. Right now, I've adopted a balanced budget, but depending on what those revenues look like and picking up those extra 10 days, we may end up eating into some of that unearned revenue, but we're starting out in a good position for this coming year. Okay, next slide. And then our regional day school program for the deaf, that we did change the revenue structure for that program. We had about $1 million in revenue last year. We're expecting about 614,000 for this current year. Expenditures for that program for the current year was about 1.2 million. We have cut a couple of positions right now out of that fund. So even though we've still got that 10-day issue sort of showing in the 2021 budget, that will come down some next year with the cuts that we've made. So for the current year, that amount that we had the deficit of 551,000, we did have unearned revenues of 91,000 to help offset that. So we're making a transfer of 460,000 there. And then for next year, that will be 486,000 that the general fund will transfer out to help fund that program. Now, that said, part of what happens with the Day School for the Deaf is we do have other districts that participate in that. However, all of the ADA generated by the students that are enrolled in that program comes into our general fund. And so this money that gets transferred out is that ADA that's generated in the general fund is getting transferred over to the Day School for the Deaf. Okay, so that's basically it for the budget presentation. Any questions?
Oh my gosh, I've never seen that many moving parts.
Me either. Like I said, 32 of these, never.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you for doing the best you can with what you've been given. It sounds like the rules change all the time.
Well, we'll be okay. You know, it's, we've had some bad years before. 2011 maybe was about 4 million, not quite this bad, but it was about 4 million we took a hit that year. So, you know, it happens about every 10 years, I think.
Anybody have any questions for Cheryl?
Good presentation.
Thank you, Cheryl.
So I think I know what happened this year. I'm just curious, what happened 10 years ago that precipitated the disaster?
That was at 2011-12, and we sort of had the same situation where we had stimulus funds, those ARA funds that came in and had to plug that hole in the state's budget because the state had such a huge deficit that year. And we lost, like I said, about 4 million in funding that year. ARA funds came in and made up part of it. Very similar to what's happening right now. As a matter of fact, I kept telling people when they kept talking about all this ESSER money coming, the CARES Act money coming, I said, well, don't spend it yet, because if I know the state, it'll plug on their hole, not ours. Well, it did plug our hole, but because they took our money away.
I guess I just don't remember things being that bad in 2011 and 12.
We lost, like I
Yeah.
said.
I remember 08 and 09, that was a disaster, but okay.
I think it was kind of fallout. It actually was 10-11 that we started losing, but it impacted our state allocations for the 11-12 school year. Because the summer of 2011 is when we laid off all our probationary teachers.
Right.
We ended up able to hire most of them back, but.
I do remember there were a lot of budget cuts right about 2011, but I guess I thought that was a legislative action or a result of them just wanting to cut funding, but yeah. Okay, at any rate.
I think you're right, Mr. Dupuy. That's when the legislature cut our budgets in a big way.
That's kind of how I remember it, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Okay, good job, Cheryl. Thank you. That's a lot of hard work.
A lot of
I've never done anything like that. I assume it's hard. Sure looks hard.
It can be very tedious.
I believe you.
Okay, so Cheryl, we next we need to take action.
Yes, so
the notice.
the next item does have the notice in it that we will publish tomorrow. That basically your action just sets the date of the public hearing, which will be August 27th for the budget and tax rate. And it does lay out some information there from our, this notice is actually prepared by the tax office. And so as you look on this, you can see that we have there's some information there that you might be interested in, such as our average for last year and this year, the average market value of a residence last year was 141,000. This year, 151,000. This is within Waco ISD. And then the taxable value was 107,000 up to 117,000. So it went up about $10,000 per household. Then some of this we always, it's an interesting, if you haven't looked at the notice before, there's some interesting things about it that sometimes you have to calculate the local revenue per student and the state revenue per student, and then the rate to maintain the same level of maintenance and operations revenue and paid debt service. So that our proposed rate is above that rate to maintain the same level, but again, with our TRE, we are allowed to adopt that rate. So we have a proposed rate of exactly what we expect to adopt. If you end up, you can adopt something lower than this. On the 27th, you cannot adopt anything higher than what we publish in the notice. Then, like I said, that's going to be published tomorrow. We will have the public hearing prior to the meeting on the 27th, and we'll then adopt the budget and then the tax rate that night.
And I'd like to point out this is a decreased tax rate for our community. And so you can see from $1.06 to $1.03 on the maintenance and operations side, and on the M&O side, that 23.4 down to 22.4. So that's a significant tax decrease.
But an increase in dollar amount of taxes of $92 on the average residence because of the value increase on the average residence.
Madam President,
Yes, sir.
I'll move that we approve the notice of public meeting to discuss budget and proposed tax rate for the 2020-2021 fiscal year.
I'll second
As presented.
I'll still second that.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Robin. Any further discussion? Questions? I'll entertain a vote on the motion as presented. If you raise your hands, that helps me.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Stephanie? It passes unanimously. Okay.
One last thing, our notice and all the required postings are on our website as of tonight, so they're out there now.
Great, thank you. And last on our agenda tonight is announcements by Mr. DeBeer.
Thank you, Madam President. Two things we'd like to highlight this evening before the meeting adjourns. The first is that there's free COVID-19 testing available in our community. That testing started today and continues through August 15th. These are the cheek swab type tests, and most people see results back in 24 to 72 hours. Certainly, if anyone suspects that they may have the virus, they're encouraged to be tested and can do that at the Highlander Gym at MCC from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day. It's possible to just walk up to the gym and no advance registrations required. The other thing we wanted to highlight for you this evening is that the intergovernmental meeting between the board and the Waco City Council is set for next week at noon on Wednesday. And as with this meeting, that'll be taking place by video conference. And at this moment in the pandemic, it'll be a nice opportunity to talk about the collaboration that's happened around the intergovernmental response to the virus and pandemic in our community.
And that reminds me, Mr. DeBeer, we are discussing having a hybrid meeting on August 27th. So that some members can appear virtually if they please, and some can appear in person. And I don't know, hopefully you guys are working out the logistics of that. But that is the intent for those members of the board who wish to meet in person to do so, and those who wish to attend virtually via two-way communication to attend. So at least we can mirror the options that we're offering our families. And I expect you'll be getting information to all of us about the choices we need to make and how the logistics before then.
We will be. The communications department is working through those logistics, and I think it's pretty close, but wants to test a couple of details first.
Okay, that's great. So we'll be in touch with everybody about their wishes closer to the time of the meeting. Okay, I think that's it. Our agenda. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good evening.